Welcome back to the Band Nerdcast. I'm your host, Brett Newton. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm doing a simultaneous recording of both the audio and the video. So this will actually go up both on the podcast stream and on my YouTube channel, which is over at Brett Newton Composer on YouTube. For those of you who are only aware of me on the YouTube channel, I do have a weekly podcast that I do. It comes out every Friday, or nearly every Friday. I've had to miss one, where I talk about all things wind band related. And the first dozen or so episodes, I had some really in-depth interviews. Right now I'm in the middle of a Wind Band 101 course, where we talk about early history of the wind band and talk about the wind band in general, what defines it. But today we're going to do something a little bit different. As always, a big shout out to everyone who supports the podcast over on Patreon. If you want to help support the podcast, just head on over to patreon.com/bandnerdcast, and for as little as $1 an episode, like I say every week, you can really help support the podcast. And it means the world to me, to everyone who does help support it. It goes a long way in producing the podcast every week. But this week, and one of the reasons I'm doing this both on audio and video, is I'm going to be doing a sort of announcement. Oh, not sort of. It's pretty much an announcement about a new project I'm going to be embarking on that I'm going to need a lot of help in. And by a lot of help, I mean a lot of help. Basically, I am going to be starting a new wind ensemble in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I've got support from a lot of good friends, including Matthew Banks, who has been not only on my YouTube channel, but also on the podcast. And we, together with several other people, are going to be forming a new wind ensemble called the Zephyrus Ensemble. Zephyrus, of course, is the Greek god of the west wind, and I thought that would be an appropriate name for it. Well, a wind ensemble that primarily will focus on, well, wind band music, which is from the Western canon, and not only that, being in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, well, it's really kind of the home where the West begins. So, what is the Zephyrus Ensemble going to be? It's really going to be a very new concept within bands. Going back to the 1950s, we have Frederick Fennell and his Eastman Wind Ensemble to give us our first push toward really creating a true artistic ensemble that's flexible. But by and large, a lot of people have abandoned that idea of the true and flexible wind ensemble. Now, what I'm going to be doing with the Zephyrus Ensemble is essentially creating a modern hybrid period performance group. And when I say period, I'm taking a lot of inspirations from groups that perform on period instruments, historically informed practice. This is something that is really popular and widespread in the orchestral and Baroque worlds, the more mainstream classical era avenues, but it has never been approached in the wind band, with very few exceptions. But something that I really feel strongly about is that the wind band needs to have this historical informed practice in it that really goes and delves into composer's intent, which is something that I feel a lot of wind bands, a lot of wind band conductors really neglect. And what do I mean by this? Well, I played with a lot of groups. I've listened to a lot of great wind bands. I've talked to a lot of conductors, and by and large, their main focus is on the education of the students they're teaching. They really treat it as an educational ensemble. Even the ones that work with professional groups still have that educational mindset, and they forget a lot of times that the music is written by these great composers who, if they had written this for another medium, we would be taking this music and really adhering to it very strictly. Case in point, I was watching a rehearsal a couple weeks ago with the University of Texas at Austin's Wind Ensemble, and they were working on Hindemith's Symphony in B flat. Great piece, one of the standards, one of the all-time greats in the wind band literature. But the first thing I noticed is the conductor calling out cornets and trumpets, and there wasn't a cornet one to be found on the stage. And this got me thinking, well, are you doing a service to the composer by leaving out the instrument that he requested? And in my mind, in a lot of people's mind, it's, yes, you are not following the composer's wishes. And so, with something like that in mind, I want to follow in the footsteps of groups that say, the composer wrote it this way, we're going to perform it this way. We're not going to make artistic shortcuts, whereby, oh, you can play that on trumpet, no big deal. No one will know the difference. Well, yeah, they will know the difference. They just, won't speak up about it. So, one of the things I'm working on right now is, one, finding places to perform. Essentially, in the early stages, and really throughout the course of how I want the ensemble to progress, is I want to alternate between a chamber music concert and a full band concert. And ideally, the chamber music concert and the full band concert will be linked to one another. For instance, the first concert series I'm planning is The British Are Coming. And essentially we start out with British chamber music. So something along the lines of one of the Elgar wind quintets, which are not performed very often because, well, they're not standard wind quintets. There's 2 flutes in them. And something like the Holbrook Serenade, which I'm working on a new performing edition of, and things of that nature. Follow that up with a wind band concert where we play something like the Holst Suite in E flat. Now, if you don't know, Holst Suite in E flat, of course, is one of the great staples of the wind band literature. But you may not know that nearly every time it gets performed, it's performed in this Baudelarized version where we don't respect Holst's original intentions. What we've got is this hugely bloated score with everything added to it, bass sax and contrabass clarinet and alto clarinet and flugelhorns and string bass, whereas Holst's original is a very tight and lean. It can be done with about 35 players, and you really shouldn't be doing it with much more than that. And if you actually ever hear Holst's original scoring of it, it's a total revelation in the fact that it's clear, it's crisp, and it's like a completely different piece. And so that's more the direction I envision going with the ensemble. And other pieces will follow along the same line. Something like Lincolnshire Posy, which everybody knows. Most people don't follow Granger's wishes on that, though. We actually have documentation saying how Granger wanted his ensemble filled out. There's a great letter, if you can ever find it, where he says, I must have as many alto and bass clarinets as possible. This is not negotiable. 6 altos and 6 basses would be perfect. And then you go and talk to a band director and say, oh, you don't need an alto clarinet on that. When we actually have letters and pure documentation from Granger saying, not only do you need it, you should really have about 6. So a dichotomy here between the 2 camps. So what I want to do with this ensemble is really research what the composer said they wanted, what the composer wrote they wanted, and do exactly that. In that regard, I am actually having to work on some new performing editions of Bandworks. So I'm in the process right now of doing a new performing edition of a Holbrook chamber piece, the Holbrook Serenade for 12 Instruments, which I'd like to perform on the British Chamber Concert. I just finished up the Holbrook Apollo, which will get performed on the British Wind Band version, and eventually I'm probably going to be doing a new performing edition of Schmidt's Dionysiacs. And because the original version, it cannot be had in parts, and they only publish now the edited version, which really changes drastically Schmidt's original instrumentation. So that'll be one goal down the line. So what am I going to need help with? Number one, I'm going to need players. And I'm going to need high caliber, great quality players, which luckily, being in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, this is really the hotbed of wind band music basically in the world. If you want to form a wind band, the best place in the world you can do it is in Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm lucky in that regard. Or maybe it's the fact that since I'm from the area, it's the culture I grew up in. But there are so many great wind musicians in this area who are all just looking for places to play that finding musicians won't be as difficult here as it would be in other places around the country, even around the world. So with that, I'm going to be doing a big search and call soon for players who really want to participate. I also need those players to really buy into the concept that we want to do things as authentically as possible. And I think one of the hardest sells on that will be to trumpet players who say, hey, this part says cornet, please play it on a cornet with an authentic cornet mouthpiece. This is going to be a much harder sell, but I am convinced that it can be done and it will be done. Another thing that I'm going to need help with is finding original music. And this means that there will need to be some sort of a budget to purchase music. For instance, Holst Suite in E flat that I mentioned a moment ago. I can go and get the bowdlerized version that I mentioned, but finding the original version, much more difficult and much more expensive. There is a version out there, but it's really pricey, music-wise. Now, the most challenging aspect, and one that I'm actually the most excited about doing, is a long-term project for the group, and that's going to be the instrument library. And the instrument library is basically going to be a long-term project that's going to need to be housed and curated, but as the ensemble grows and as the ensemble really gains in the public eye, something I'd like to do is create what's essentially an instrument library. And that will be basically a housing unit for some of the harder to get and more obscure wind instruments that can be used by the ensemble, but also rented out to the general public when such an instrument is called for. So, for instance, an instrument like the bass saxophone. Most players are not going to own one, and in fact, most institutions won't own one either. But what happens when you get to a piece that calls for bass saxophone? Well, I can tell you exactly what a normal wind band's going to do. Leave it out. You don't need it. No one's going to hear it. Zephyrus is not going to function like that. Say, there's a bass sax part. Who's got a bass sax around here? No one? Okay, well, let's go to the instrument library. We'll rent it. Of course, if it's the Zephyrus Ensemble, the ensemble won't have to rent their own instrument, but you get the idea. And this is, again, long-term goal. This is going to need a lot of fundraising, a lot of backing. But again, I'm convinced that this is actually a really good and needed idea. And I've already started crunching some numbers on that. And I think within a few years, it's totally doable with some really hardcore fundraising and backing, and just gotta find the right backers on that. But we're going to be working with some fundraisers on that, and that's a down the road, but not too far down the road project. And another thing that I really feel very strongly about is performing the music of living composers, and not just going and playing all historical music. Because, if we go and play all historical music, that music is, well, for lack of a better term, that music is dead. We can look at it on the page and we know how it's going to be performed. The new music, new composers, that's music that's alive. And that's how we grow as a medium, as an ensemble. And something like the Zephyrus Ensemble will really be in the forefront of trying to push creative artistry in wind band composing. And we're not going to limit it to, you must fit into this standard model that most universities and high schools fall into. Said we're only going to say, oh, you can only have this many of whatever, only 4 saxes, only 3 trumpet parts. We'll say it, if we commission a piece, write what you want, and we have the players. And to me, that's as a composer, it's a huge breath of fresh air. Say, write the music that you hear, and we will perform that music. Be as creative as you want. Obviously, there will be some limits. Please, don't write for sub-contrabass saxophone because we just can't get one. But, there are some limits. But, of course, write the music you want. We'll perform that music. And only through this kind of experimentation, through this exploration, can the wind ensemble really grow as a medium. Because if we're stuck in this stagnant model of just this basic makeup of the band, it gets a little boring after a while, and you start kind of repeating ideas. We see this with the orchestra. We don't see a lot of growth in orchestral music because we formalized what the orchestra is and what it can be. And, well, when was the last true masterpiece written for orchestra? And I can't tell you, but I can't think of anything written in the last 10, maybe even 20 years that's going to be considered a true masterpiece that will live through the ages, like a Beethoven or a Mahler symphony. And the pieces that do stick out are those that are pushing the boundaries. So I want to be able to push those boundaries with the wind ensemble because it's a much newer and really a much more flexible medium. So I'm taking this really from the approach not of a band person, but as an orchestra person. Say, okay, show me what you got and we'll do it. To that effect, I am going to serve as the music director of the group, meaning I'm going to make all the musical decisions, and I'm going to actually conduct the group. And this is going to be a huge step for me personally. I've always had an interest in conducting, and I've done quite a bit of it, and I feel I'm pretty good at it. I'm one of those conductors that when I conduct, I actually memorize the score, so that will be interesting with some of these much bigger pieces. But by and large, I'm going to be music director. My friend Matthew Banks has agreed to be the personnel director. He's going to be in charge of working on getting the players. And of course, I'll have some hand in that. But it's for me something that's really driving me a lot lately is when can we get this done? When can we get this done? Let's do it. Let's do it. And I'm excited. You can tell I may have had a little bit too much coffee this morning, and I'm excited about this possibility. A new wind ensemble, a new real direction for the wind ensemble as a medium, as a genre. And it's the right place, it's the right time to make it happen. And I am looking forward to having the first concert. And if everything goes well, I'd like to have first concert sometime in February. So, right around the corner, and get this just banged out and just started. And we're going to start with the chamber concert, just to get kind of the feet wet and get the local players involved. And then we're going to move on to a smaller wind band concert where we play Holst, and we play Holbrook, and several other pieces, and then move on to there. I actually have the whole first season planned out. One concert will be French, where we do the original version of Schmidt's Dionysiacs, which I'm so excited about. And I may end up doing a whole podcast on Dionysiacs itself, because it is so cool. To me, it's the rite of spring of the wind band, and we just neglect it. We've changed it up so that we never hear the original sound of it. And to perform it in the original version, I don't think that's ever been done in the United States. And pair that with the original version of Berlioz's Symphonie Funèbre Triomphale. Again, another one of my absolute favorites that never gets done in the original version. All this builds up to my secret pet project, something that I have been working on for years now. And the final concert will be a double feature with, my music. As vain as that sounds, that is one of the ultimate goals here, is a concert where we perform on the first half, Symphony 2, and on the second half, Symphony 3. And Symphony 3 is just about finished. I will probably finish initial composing within the week. And it can easily be billed as the most massive band concert ever put on. A double symphony feature featuring the two largest symphonies ever written for wind band. And that, again, is the end goal. Now, of course, I'm talking about plans. How are we going to do this? Well, number one, I'm putting this out there. This is my call to action. If you are interested in performing in the group and you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, please get in contact with me. You can, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment and a way to get a hold of you. If you are listening to this on the podcast, the email is at the end of the podcast. It's bandnerdcast@gmail.com. You can get a hold of me on Facebook through Brett Newton Composer there, or Instagram at Brett Newton Composer. This is, like I said, an exciting project. We're looking for professional level musicians, and we'll take, college students on up, maybe some really advanced high school players, if, like we're talking, all state level players here, because the music is not going to be easy. We're going to be doing this in very limited rehearsal time, probably about 4 rehearsals per major band concert. Definitely more when it comes to the premieres of my 2 symphonies. That's down the road, and that's going to be the most massive project I have personally ever undertaken. But that said, if you are interested, get in contact with me. I want to make this happen. This is, like I said, a huge, huge project. And thanks for listening to my ramble. Thanks for watching the ramble. For those of you watching this on the YouTube. And by the way, for those of you on the YouTube, if you are interested, head on over to bandnerdcast.com and you can subscribe to the podcast. You can always leave a review on iTunes. Please leave positive reviews. That helps get listenership up. And thanks for watching or listening to this today. I hope I don't ramble too much. Actually, because I am both audio and video recording this, I'm not going to do any post-production on the audio. I'm just going to send it out as is. So thank everybody. Thank through the Patreon supporters. And this is my formal announcement for the Zephyrus Ensemble that we are forming and will be a reality, and it's going to be a huge new step in wind band music. So, thanks so much.